Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being late. Uh, we had a little bit of a technical issue, hopefully much lighter than last time. My name is Bob George. I work at the MTRS's IT department. I used to be the Director of Employer Services. And today, we're going to be going through deduction reporting. And this is going to be specifically the process of moving your files from the initial stage and submitting them to us as pending files. So I'm excited about today's presentation. We've got a couple components. We're going to go through a presentation in PowerPoint, and then we're going to move over to MyTRS and we're going to do a live demo. We're going to go through two different deduction reports. We're going to play with a bunch of different common errors that people see. So let's get started. And again, I apologize for being late. Hopefully, you've all received the meeting reminder for today's presentation. And in that meeting reminder, you'll see that there's a handout that will cover all the different slides. So if you want to follow together with us as we're going through it, you can use that sort of slide handout, make notes, or whatever you'd like. So, all right. So with that, let's get started. Oops. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about, so we did a bunch of training seminars this summer. This is the last one. We tried to do this before and our demo got messed up. So for some of you who are attending for the second time, thank you for your patience. And actually, before I get started, I also just want to thank you on behalf of both the board and the executive director for joining us today. Forgot to mention that. So obviously they make this happen. So training sessions were offered this summer. We have 6 of them. They're all available online. We went through kind of soup to nuts. We'll talk about those in just a second. We're going to go through deduction reporting deadlines, payments using EFTs, the 3 report statuses, the payroll calendar, deduction report editor, the 3rd level errors. We're going to do the demo, and then we'll go through review and just field any questions you got. So hopefully you find this helpful, and we'll go from there. So just want to make sure this is updating. Okay, great. So this is the list of the actual trainings we went through. And so we covered, introduction to the MyTRS, eligibility. And for those of you who might be watching online, please know it makes sense to kind of go through these in order in the way that they're listed. For some folks, you might not have to do all of this. Let's say you need to know who's eligible, but you don't necessarily need to know deduction reporting. That's fine. You're always welcome to watch them all just to, be, a little more well-rounded in your position, of course. But you can mix and match as you'd like. I would recommend, though, for the folks who are, especially the folks that are primarily reporting to us, that you go through them and that you go through them in order so that they make a little more sense. There was a method to the madness. So you can see we're on today's session here at the bottom, monthly reporting, submitting the file. So let's get moving. So first and foremost, statutory reporting deadlines. I know we've talked about this in a prior program as well, but reports and the payments are due on the 10th of the month, and that's for the prior month. So for instance, your September report's due on October 10th. In theory, you should have the payment to us. You should have a report that's full, complete, and fully in pending status, meaning it was submitted to us. Now, we're not going to call you on the 11th, but really, folks, let's do our best to try and get those in there. You can always do them early, which is great. But it's really important to try and get as close to statutory compliance as possible, and it allows us to do what we're doing for your employees. Okay. Now, there is a statutory penalty for reporting late. Now, the MTRS really doesn't want to go here if we don't have to, right? But in the statute, we have the right to pursue, court orders or actions in Superior Court in accordance with Chapter 32, Section 18(1)(a). We don't want to do this. This isn't what we want to do, but please know that that is there and it is available as an option. So, again, we wouldn't want to go that direction, but it is something we can pursue. Now, in addition to the statutes on the regulation, or excuse me, on the deadline date, we also have a reporting regulation. As a state agency, of course, that's state law, right? So MTRS has a monthly reporting regulation. It's 807 CMR 5. You can find it on our website if you'd like to. You can also find it in the official list of registered regulations. And it's 807 5.02 deduction reports, right? So again, each governmental unit whose employees are in the MTRS, you have to submit your reports monthly. Again, that is consistent with the statute language too. So there has to be one report per month. You can do payments a little more frequently. I know some folks like to cut the check at the end of each payroll and send it that way. If you don't want a check sitting around your office, I completely understand. You can do it that way. A few folks actually do EFTs after each payroll. not a problem. Paying it a little sooner, the pension system's not going to say no to the money, so you can always send it a little earlier, but you do have to send it at least once a month. Now, sometimes things happen. There's transitions in personnel, somebody's out on medical leave or something. So if you have to do a catch up, so you're like, okay, sorry, last month never got sent. We're sending you 2 months at the same time. Please make sure you keep them specifically separate. Do not send one check for 2 months. You can send them all in one package, of course, but please make sure you issue separate payments for each report, okay? And then last but not least, there is an exception for very, very, very small employers. If the board grants an exception for you, we might be able to help you a little bit with your electronic reporting. But to my knowledge, I believe we only do this for one employer at this point. And again, it's at the discretion of the board, and it's only available for very tiny school districts. Don't get me wrong. If you're in a reporting bind and you need help from the ESU, they're awesome and they will do what they can to help you. All right. So reporting requirements. Again, the deduction reports must be submitted electronically, no paper. Payments are submitted online via EFT, or you can mail a check to us at our lockbox, and the address to the lockbox is all in the submittal form. We're going to look at that next. Monthly payments must match your deduction report prior to submission to pending, right? So it kind of makes sense, right? You collect money from your employees, you're going to send it to us. Well, obviously, you have to give us the money you collected, and then the report you give us has to reflect that. Now, occasionally you could find yourself in a reporting situation where, because of timing, maybe you did like a last minute adjustment payroll on the 30th and you've already cut the check or something like that. In that case, you need to have the two reports obviously need to offset each other, and there needs to be ample commenting, not with the checks, but in the deduction reports. All reporting is electronic, so please make sure you note it. You can immediately sign into MyTRS and make the note as soon as you load the file. So please do that and make sure it's always. And in a situation like that, we'll accept it, knowing that obviously the two will offset each other. We can draw it back to a very specific person. We can trace it. That's how accounting works. Okay. So if you can make multiple payments. I know I mentioned this in the prior slide, but you do have to do one report per month per statute. Occasionally we'll have somebody who's like changing payroll vendors in the middle of the month and they want to send one from each payroll software package or something. If you find yourself in that very unique situation, reach out to us. We do need still one report, but we might have a tool that can help you put those two reports together so that you have your one report and you're in compliance with the regulation and the statute. Now, please note, we want to work with you. We don't benefit from in any way by this being any more difficult for you. We don't want it to be more difficult for you. So please know we want to do what we can to help you, but obviously it's your responsibility to make sure you're following and you are in compliance with what the statute requires. This is the deduction submittal form I mentioned before. And again, this is just the one page. Think of this as like your deposit slip for your check. So if you're sending this in, you put in your agency code, your name, the month. You can list up to 4 checks per sheet. You can do a couple sheets if you want to. You'll see a big hazard sign right in the middle telling you never to include any other paperwork. The only thing that should come in that envelope are payments, submittal forms, and a stamp. That's all you need, okay? You probably don't use real stamps, but not the point. Okay, now EFT payments, so paying us electronically. MyTRS allows for employers to create a direct debit to withdraw funds from your payroll account. So think of this as like bill pay. If you're paying your utilities or something, basically you store an account in MyTRS each month. Either someone from payroll, maybe someone from the treasurer's office signs in. They say, okay, please take out this much money. This is how much we're going to owe you for, October. You enter in the payment, you submit it, good to go. The next morning, MTRS will process a file. We'll pull the funds from your account, and then of course you'll see it in MyTRS. Now it can take a couple days before you see it in MyTRS because employer payments will mix in with all of the checks that are sent for that date, and they also sometimes mix in with member payments. So sometimes we have to figure out why a member mailed us a check. So it can take an extra day or two for the EFT to show, but that doesn't mean it's in danger at all. It's just in limbo for that actual day's deposit to post. While it's in pending status, you will be able to see it in the system. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a minute. So payments can be canceled on any given day up until 6:45. So it has to be canceled on the day they're entered, of course. So let's say you make a payment. We had a situation once where somebody meant to send us $400,000. probably just didn't have enough coffee yet, and they typed in an extra digit. Unfortunately, the difference between 400,000 and $4 million is only one digit. So please make sure you're very careful looking at how much you typed in. And please know that we do have a functionality that allows you to delete that payment now. So please be careful, look at what you did, make sure you're being careful, and then again, you can delete it. If you don't know how to delete it, you're freaking out, you can call your employer services rep and they'll know how to do it. We also have a video on how to do it on our website. So hopefully you never run into that. Now, this is a example of the EFT screen. So this is where both EFT and non-EFT payments sit. So this is an example, obviously, training district, Blackboard Public Schools. And in the top left-hand corner, you can see where if you're doing an EFT, this is where you would click make a payment. Over on the maintain EFT accounts where this other arrow is, you can see the account that I've set up here. It's a fake Bank of America account. And then you can see I did a fake Bank of America EFT just to show you kind of, what it would look like when you're doing your payment. Okay. Now, when we're going through deduction reports, we're going to have you reference the screen as far as submitting your report, because I mentioned before, you're collecting money from your employees, you're sending us a payment. Those two things have to add up. Okay. So this is where you access that information. It's EFT and payments. Now, let's say you're doing it the old-fashioned way, no problem with that. So you're mailing just check in a submittal form. You'll see that all your open payments are listed here. Now, this particular payment's only for $100, but if you made a payment for, say, $36,000, it would show here. It does show as negative, very counterintuitive for a payment. Why would a payment be negative? It just made sense to programmers, I guess. I can't give you a better answer than that. So having said that, though, you'll see your payments are listed here, and then you'll have the original amount of the payment and the balance available. So if for some reason you sent us $50,000, but you overpaid us by $2,000, as mentioned before, because of that, last minute adjustment kind of scenario, you would see, maybe $50,000 here, but there were, $2,000 left that can be applied to that next report. Okay. Generally speaking, though, every payment should apply to its own report. So these will almost always balance. They'll either, or sometimes you might actually see, if you look in closed payments, you can see what the original payment was, and then you'll see the balance is zero because we used it to pay for your deduction report. All right. So this brings us to deduction reports themselves. So when you're in deduction reporting, deduction reports have three main statuses. For those of you who sat through this program before, or the imports, you'll know that the three statuses are initial, pending, and released. Initial means you were initially working on it. So you imported your file, you got it into deduction reports, you're like, oh, good, I'm done. No, the fun has just begun. That means you have the file, you're initially working on it, and you have yet to officially submit it to the MTRS. Okay. Now, once you go through and you make all the changes we're going to discuss today, it's going to transition to the pending status. And what pending means is pending MTRS approval or employer services approval. So pending means that the ball's in our court. We're looking at it. Now, we may have questions. So technically, the ball might be in your court if we sent you over questions or we're waiting for answers. One of the things we can do, now we try not to do this because, if you have a report, it's got 2,500 people on it, and I've got two questions, I try not to send it back to initial if I don't have to. But please know that I can. And then, we kind of put the onus back on you. But a lot of times, if we get through a report, we think we're close to getting it done. We don't want to hold things up anymore. We have to. So sometimes, even when we have questions and they aren't pending, we'll try to keep them that way. There are other times where we look at an initial report, we're like, oh my God, there's like so many things that need to get fixed here. I'm going to send those back. And it'll go back to initial, which again means you own it. You need to work on it and resubmit. Okay. And then last but not least is released. This might be counterintuitive by the name, but this means we have taken the records from the employer report and we've released them into your employees' accounts. So that information is now available to them in their account. They can see it. They see it added to their creditable service, and that report is done forever. Okay. Now, even though your main focus is probably only going to be on the reports you have to submit, at any given time, if you're in MyTRS, you can always look back at your pending and your released files all the way back to 2010. Okay, that's when we first introduced MyTRS. Now, when you're working on your deduction reports, we have a checklist available to you. So this is available online. It's the last page, or if you have the booklet, the training manual on how to use MyTRS, Spiral Brown's got the really colorful cover. The last page is the reporting checklist. So feel free to rip it out, make a copy, whatever you'd like to do. But if you're relatively new to deduction reporting, this is your friend. This will show you, literally walk you through step by step on all the things you're supposed to do for a deduction report. And it's kind of granular. So it looks like, oh my God, there's so many steps. But really, depending on the size of your deduction report, you can get through these steps pretty easily, okay? Now, you'll see in this particular example, I have 2 red arrows pointing to 2 steps, and you might look closely and see that they say the same thing. The reason we say this is because, we've had an issue recently with reports being submitted to us, and they don't add up to the payment. Seems to be the most fundamental thing, when you really think about it, right? I mean, you take deductions from somebody, you send us a check, they got to balance out, right? But we're having a big issue with this. So we wanted to point out that in the beginning of the checklist and at the end of the checklist, you should be checking to make sure your report still balances to your payment. If you went in there and you made some adjustment records, or you added a couple people, or whatever you had to do, at the end of the day, when you're looking at this report, you want to make sure it still matches your payment. If not, you need to backtrack and figure out where it went wrong. Okay. If you need help backtracking, we can help you with that, but you can't just submit it and not pay attention to the balance. In situations like that, we are going to be pushing those files back to you. It doesn't mean we don't want to help, but I mean, come on, it doesn't add up to the check. What can we do? Now, if for some reason we will check your notes, though, just to make sure that you don't say, hey, wait, I know it's off by this much. This is what happened. Okay. So we'll look for that first. But otherwise, we will send it back to you and say, hey, this doesn't add up. I can't work on this. And then last but not least, on the notes about variances, because I had one of these the other day, somebody in the schools was like, oh yeah, I left a note saying, yeah, it doesn't match. That's not sufficient. You have to know why, right? So in their particular case, it was because 2 people were actually missing from the report. So if we had just accepted that, those 2 people wouldn't have gotten their creditable service for that period. So obviously not acceptable. All right. Now, are there any questions leading up to that? Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm doing a good pace so that we don't lose, trying to make up for a little bit of the lateness time here. Scott, do you know if we have anything? Scott, you're on mute if you're talking. Okay, I think we're having some tech difficulties there. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide. So, oh, here we go.
There are no questions at this time.
Thanks. So, the payroll calendar. So, we've gotten to the point where, all right, we have files in the system, talked about the 3 statuses. Let's talk about the payroll calendar. The payroll calendar, we're working with 400 different districts. You guys all do your own thing. We're fully supportive of that, right? You got to do what you got to do to get kids educated. So this allows the MTRS to kind of bring everybody in on the same level, right? So what the payroll calendar does, it allows you to tell us how you pay your employees or when you're going to pay your employees in any given month. Now, payroll calendars, each distinct pay frequency is going to need a calendar. And the calendar must be set up for the calendar year, not school year. I know that's really counterintuitive, but if you think it through, school years are a little crazy, right? Because a teacher's school year and an administrator's school year are different. Sometimes you can have 11-month employees, or you have teachers in a particular program. If we tried to do it on school year, there's just so many variables. Everybody, has the same calendar. And most important, depending on people's pay frequencies and stuff, we're really only looking at it 1 month at a time, right? So capturing it on a calendar, it's consistent. It allows us to do it the same way for everybody. And so that's why it works that way. I feel like I need to explain that because it is very counterintuitive for folks. Now, old calendars must stay in the system. And that's because we have a tool called the Creditable Service Estimator for members, and it depends on that calendar. So it takes some key information from that calendar. So never delete your old calendars unless obviously they were added in error or something, but then they need to be replaced or if they need to be fixed or something. But we need to keep those calendars in the system, okay? And then last but not least, when you're adding your calendars, now there's a function that allows you to generate the dates. We have a video on this. I didn't do a video demonstration of the actual payroll calendar just because I think it is pretty rudimentary. You add dates, you can adjust them as you need it. But if folks have questions on this, by all means, we'll field them when we're in MyTRS and we can look at one live if that's helpful. All right. Now, along with the calendar, and again, I'm going to show you a picture of the calendar. I should have said that too. So along with the calendar, we talk about lump sum and summer dates. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but schools pay a lot of folks out over the summer. So If you have pay frequencies of, say, 20 to 23 or 40 to 44, those are going to be the schedules where there's no lump sum portion. You're just paying people from September to June. They don't get paid at all, or they don't get any kind of balloon payment. And then they just show up again in September, hopefully, and then they start getting paid again, right? So those folks should have a pay duration in our system of 10. They are not lump sum people. And if you have frequencies, you're going to need calendars for those. You don't check them off as summer dates. Those are going to be just non-pay dates. So, if you use the generator, it'll create pay dates for those over the summer, and you just want to delete them off your calendar because nobody in those pay frequencies gets paid over the summer. Okay. Now, for employers who implement some sort of a lump sum pay, well, your lump sum date, you're going to see a column called summer pay dates. I'll show you that in just a minute. And you're going to check off which dates are included in the lump sum. And then your lump sum date should be the last date prior to the dates that are checked off. Now, that might be a little theoretical now, but I'll show you what a picture looks like. Some of you already know what a calendar looks like, so you're probably good to go with this. But it's important to make sure you have the proper date marked off as your lump sum. Now, employers implement a couple of different possibilities. So you might have 6 individual records on your lump sum date. MITRS will allow for that. You can have 1 individual record and 1 lump sum record. MITRS will allow for that. You can have 1 big lump sum record. MITRS will allow for that. We have 1 crazy district that does 2 lump sums of 3 checks apiece. Okay, MITRS doesn't allow for that, but you mark the second one as your lump sum payroll, and your first one, you're going to have to mark everybody as PO. I don't know why that 1 district does it that way, but they've been doing it the whole time MITRS is out, and it works okay for them. We just, it's just a little more work on their June report. If the lump sum is paid on an off-cycle date, typically, that'll be schools that kind of pay on the last day of school. It's kind of an old sort of carried over tradition from when people didn't have direct deposit, so they're giving people their checks before they disappear for the summer and come back a couple months later. And so in situations like that, you're going to see that it could create, first you're going to have to add the payroll to the calendar. And then you're probably going to have some missing folks. Those are going to be your non-lump sum employees. So you'll have to add a note to the report saying, yeah, okay, so these are our people that are non-lump sum, and they're going to show up as missing. I've actually mocked that up so we can show that as part of the demo. So we'll get to that. A little spoiler for the June demo. Okay, so, and then last but not least, in the deduction records for each employee, there are a couple different fields. So I know I already talked about pay durations being one of those fields earlier. If you have folks that are on lump sum and they're getting their lump sum payment, their pay duration, one of the fields in their deduction record for that pay date, needs to be LS. Now, if you know they're going to be lump sum, you can report them as lump sum all year. Put it in your payroll system, set it, forget it. You should be good to go. In some school districts who apparently don't like payroll people, they might give you very little time before the lump sum payroll, before people have to make an election into it. So it becomes more important to make sure you get it in there for the June report. In some cases, you have to manually do them on the June report. I'm sorry that you end up getting stuck with that situation, but that will tell MITRS like, oh, okay, we should use the lump sum logic on this person. And everybody who's not lump sum has a 12 because they're going to get paid over July and August, right? So it helps MITRS understand, okay, we have this set of rules for this person and we have another set of rules for this other person. All right. Now, this is what the payroll calendar looks like, and you see some arrows here. So you'll see at the top, it's 26 biweekly. It is a calendar year calendar. So, right, the start date's always going to be 1/1. Your end date's always going to be 12/31. But your actual pay dates are going to be whatever you pay people on. So this is for the Blackboard Public Schools. Where the blue arrow is, I used the generate function. A window pops up and you put in your first pay date. So I put in January 5th, 2024, and then I generated them all. And you can see that it created all the different pay dates for me in order. Okay. Now, if you ever need to move one of these, you might need to slide one for, say, July 4th happens to fall on a pay date, or the most common one, or I think everybody really kind of has to move, is around Thanksgiving. So when you're setting up your calendar, you might have no idea what you're going to do about that yet, right? And that's fine. You can always make a change, even if you've already loaded your report to MITRS. You can always make a change, and then you just have to go back to the report and validate it so that it knows to recheck the calendar, and you should be good to go. Now, I mentioned for lump sum that there's a summer payday column. And in the summer payday column, this is where the green arrow is pointing, and that's where you would check off dates for the summer. So, for instance, if June 21st was our lump sum for Blackboard Public Schools, that would not be checked off, but the dates following it would be. So usually, July and August pay dates. All right. I did not show it here because I don't want to be too much. I don't want to have too much of a spoiler for what we have planned for the demo. But I think the calendar is pretty straightforward. The biggest thing about the calendar is we try to send a reminder. We have a video on it that just covers the calendar. The thing with the calendar is that by the time you're good at it, you're done, and you don't have to do it till the next year. And next year when you go to do it, you're like, wait a minute, I did this last year. What? I forget how to do this. So we try to send that out every year. If you run your January file and everybody has a hot mess number of errors, try to think first immediately, like, oh, I probably forgot to do my calendar. All right. So those are sort of the setup pieces to get us into the deduction report editor. So to get to the deduction report editor, that's the screen you get to when you click on deduction report. Okay. So your file's in initial status, and you're going to access it with the deduction report editor. And this is where you're going to run into the third level validation process. When a report's in initial status is not considered submitted, right? So you've loaded it, but you haven't sent it to the MQRS. Again, that's just one of the steps in the process. So it's up to you to make sure you have the balance. You're going to make sure it's accurate. You're going to make sure you're looking for potential issues, explain things that need to be explained, resolve data issues. In many cases, getting into initials really just step one, and the real work happens in the deduction report editor. And then depending on how complicated or how large your school district is, how much work you have to do from that point on, really depends on the complexity of your employment situation. Or sometimes how much your payroll software does or doesn't like you. Okay, so when you're in the deduction report editor, one of the things I want to mention, oh yes.
Hi, Bobby, we do have a question.
Sure.
Do you want to take that now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So the question is there any reason why reports which are balanced and submitted on time are still pending after 12 months? For example, the 2023 reports.
So it's a great question. The quick answer to why something is balanced and reported and it's been sitting for a while, I can tell you that when we first rolled out the newest version of MyTRS, it was, shall we say, technically challenged. So we've gone through a lot of changes here. I've been actually moved to IT. I think I mentioned that before. Shannon is now driving the bus in the employer services unit along with Tanya Timon. We have added staff on our part to try and bulk up our capability and do a better job of supporting our employers to get those reports resolved. In some cases, one report might be, one employer might be waiting for us while we're trying to help another employer. And in some cases, it might be that we have questions. I can tell you that we've looked at every employer that I'm aware of. So in theory, because the reports have to be processed chronologically, if all of your 2023 reports are just sitting around waiting to be done, it's because we have questions on a 2022 report or an early 2023 report. So if they're balanced and they're good to go, I'm kind of hard pressed to believe. Now, we're not perfect. It's totally possible we somehow missed an employer that has them in that status, but that should not be a thing. I can tell you that we've cycled through, we've talked to all staff, we check in with them all the time. When I say we, really, it's Shannon and Tanya, but the team is constantly reviewing and looking through. So if you feel that you're in that situation, ask your assigned employer services representative, because that doesn't seem like it makes sense. So my thought process would be there must be a missed communication in there, especially at this point. I can tell you we did over, they did over 700 reports last month, right? So almost 2 months worth in 1 month. And they're cramming through them every single day. So if you're in that boat, reach out to your employer services rep because something's amiss. Any other questions?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So apply versus save. So when you're in your deduction report, you'll see 2 buttons up in the top left. And again, we're going to do a demo. You're going to see what these look like. But the real difference between apply and save, they do exactly the same thing, except for one key feature. Apply will commit all your changes, but will let you remain in edit mode. Save commits all your changes, and then it exits the report. Okay. So in both cases, there's been a change to the way it works in the newer version of MyTRS in the last year or so versus the way it worked in MyTRS for many years, okay? And that is that if you hit apply or save, if you're working on a deduction report, it will validate every record that you have done something to, So if you've made a modification of some sort to a record, it will check that record, but it will only check those records. So if you've done something, let's say you open a report and you forgot to create your payroll calendar for the year, right? So now you go back to your report, you hit apply, because that used to be what you would do, and it would refresh and all the errors would go away. You hit apply now and nothing's changed. Well, the payroll calendar exists outside the report, and so you haven't modified those records, right? So what you would need to do in that case, you have to save the report to close it out. And before you get into the deduction report, you have a validate button, okay? You want to hit that button and it will search through the whole system, including the payroll calendars, including the roster, and it does a more complete revalidation of the report, okay? Now, if you go into a report, it's crucial when you're on your way in, always hit validate before you get there, right? That way you're always looking at fresh error output. Nobody wants you chasing bad or stale errors, right? That's frustrating. When you get into a report, if you've made any modification to any record, so now you bring up your errors and exceptions, again, we're going to go through a couple exception reports, you hit apply or save, and it will rethink that person's record that you have changed. Now, if the person has 2 records, hint, hint, you're going to see an example of this later, it may only change the one you made a change to, and so I'm going to kind of show you that, okay? Now, there are examples which require a user to now hit validate, and one of them would be, for instance, if you have duplicate records, right? Missing members, if you've gone into their profile and you've resolved it, well, there's no record on the file, right? So let's say they're missing because they terminated. Well, they're not on the report. That's the whole point. The system was expecting them based on their payroll calendar and their roster status, and so you went to the roster and you terminated them. And everything's good, like you've done what you need to do. But to make that work, you're going to have to hit save, hit validate on the deduction report itself, and now that missing member will disappear. And then last but not least, member status related things. So this is very much like the missing members, like if you're going to go to somebody and you're going to mark them returned from leave, or you're going to go to that person and, let's say they used to be an employee, so they got through all your imports, but now they need to get registered because they've just been rehired. And it kind of got missed, and imports won't pick it up because they used to be your employee. So, the fact that they're showing up on a report for your employer isn't strange. So it can be situations like that. Essentially, that the fix exists outside of the deduction report, and that's where you're going to have to make sure that you're hitting validate. All right, and that's relatively new, but we did that for performance to try and make the process a little better for you as you're making changes and hitting apply as you go. All right, hopefully that's helpful. So, when you're in the deduction reports, now we're talking about errors and exceptions, right? So errors and exceptions, sometimes you'll see exceptions called warnings, little inconsistency with the software there, but errors and exceptions in the rest of life are synonyms, right? But for us, there's a very important distinction. Errors, you cannot submit your report no matter what you do. Jesus can come from the sky, he can't submit your report, it has errors on it. However, exceptions can be submitted, but they, in a lot of cases, must be explained, right? So you have somebody, and we're going to have some examples of that. So I'll get into some of those examples, but it's really an important distinction. Errors, you cannot submit the report, but just because you have exceptions doesn't mean you're done. You may need to go through those records. You still may need to fix some data. So make sure you're reading and checking your exceptions. And then once all your exceptions, you believe all the data is accurate, then you can override them and you'll submit your report all in one piece. And we'll show you that too. Now, again, I know I'm being a dead horse a little bit here, but deduction reports must match their associated payment before being submitted for review. Deduction reports can be filtered using the filter in the top right of the screen, by the way, and we're going to show you what that looks like. And, most deduction reports, like I said, with the, when you get to the exceptions, you're not quite done per se, right? You're going to have to give us, employment situations like adjustment records, salary adjustments, situations triggering retro pay, or pro rata pay, pardon me, or sometimes retro pay, frankly, true missing member exceptions, skewed deduction rates. We got all this built into the demo, but those are going to require comments, okay? And it's important you get those comments in there. Now, this is where you're gonna, again, we're in the deduction report editor. I know I've already kind of talked about some of these errors, but this is where we run into the third level errors and exceptions, right? So we, in the previous videos, especially for those of you watching online, maybe you're watching this back to back, God, I hope not, but Your third level exceptions are going to be your more sophisticated things, right? So this is where we're comparing your report's financial info against itself, against the person's profile. We're going to ask you why someone's salary changed, or, okay, you're saying their salary's this much. Why are you paying them half as much as it looks like you should? Maybe it's because they're mid-year hire or something. So we're going to identify people who haven't been enrolled, meaning they haven't done their part of the enrollment process, and folks that appear to be missing, right? That's a really important thing, because it could be that deductions need to be started for that person, or maybe they're no longer employed and we need to update the roster and make sure that's up to date. So these are all very important things, and they all have creditable service impacts, and that's why we need to make sure we're getting this stuff right, okay? Because your members are earning their benefit based on their creditable service. Super important. You have to make sure all your errors are corrected before you try to submit a report. And of course, you need your, when needed, exceptions need to be explained. And of course, your report has to add up, right? So all that stuff has to be taken care of before you're sending it. Now, here's just some common, third level errors. We're going to run into some of these in the demo, but based salaries doesn't match, or someone's full-time, part-time percentage is off. You'll see the third one, kind of lengthy, but basically what it's saying is, you're paying this person, but according to the roster, they're terminated. Now, there's a very similar, very long message if the person's on leave of absence, right? So if you have a person on a leave of absence status of not being paid, MITRE-S, is going to say, hey, wait a minute, why'd you pay them, right? Same thing with the termination. With terminations, I'd say, honestly, the most common one that I run into is when you're terminating them, you list their last pay date as the effective pay date for the termination. For some reason, that just seems intuitive, but it's not the right thing, right? Because with any event, you want to associate the pay date associated with that event. So if it's a non-pay event, it's the day they're not getting paid, right? So please keep that in mind, all right? Other third level validation errors, you're going to have payday can't be found in your district. Again, that's a calendar thing. Might be that you're paying somebody on a weird date. Duplicate record found in member history. So you have two records for the same pay date for somebody. That doesn't make sense. And again, I actually incorporated some of these into the demo. So these are just, again, more common errors, and you'll see pretty soon how some of that stuff works. Now, some common third level exceptions. Now, sometimes this throws newer folks off. The base to salary error becomes an exception if you give us a code. And we try to make MITRE-S polite. It thanks you for providing us with a service correction code. And you might say to yourself, wait a minute, if I just told you what this is supposed to do, why is it still showing up as an exception? Well, it shows up as an exception, A, to remind you to make sure you pick the right code, and B, so that when it goes to pending status, your assigned employer services representative is aware of what's going on. They can check, does the code based on the situation that we're aware of, does it look reasonable? Does it look correct? Because again, it impacts creditable service for your members, and we want to make sure we're getting that right on the way in. Now, another kind of common exception is when people's rates look like they're coming out at the wrong rate. We're going to ask you not to do anything on those until we can research whether or not the rate is correct. We have a whole team of folks working on that around, at least it feels like around the clock. So they're plugging away at those, and they're trying to catch up with the Retirement Plus election that just happened with the legislature. We have videos of that online. So that's super important. However, you can see between the second and third one, there's a slight difference. In the third one, where I've highlighted in blue, the school rate is 12.71%. That's not logical. Payroll systems don't take 12.71%. So anytime you see one of these skewed rates, right, and if somebody has a better term for this is our term for it, but I'm still waiting. 20 years so far, and skewed is the best one we got. Thank you, Dave Harbison. So skewed rates are when there's an odd percentage, 12.71%, 15.4%. Again, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So what you're going to see when you get this rate, we're going to have a couple examples for you in the demo. This is an indicator of something else that's going on here, right? Something's going on with the data, right? Like there's a problem with, the earnings associated or something. Because again, payroll systems don't take 12.71%. Now, along with a rate error, whether it's because it's skewed or because it's a true, rate difference, a lot of times you'll see a 2% exception. So for instance, 2% rate error, expected 29, but reported 0. Well, in this case, if you're taking 11% when MPRS thinks you're supposed to take 9%, we're looking for a 2% rate, right? A 2% deduction. However, if you're taking 11, you're not sending a 2% because why would you? 11% members don't pay 2%. So really, it's important that you think of those two exceptions as like a couple. They're a pair. And so really, to resolve one, you got to resolve the other, right? Now, if you only get the 2% error and you're not getting a rate error, that's a thing entirely different. That means your system's calculating 2% wrong. And so, that could be its own demon. But if you're getting both of these together, remember that their causalities, tied together, and I'd say 98, 99% of the time. All right. Now, adjustment record detected, we allow you to do adjustment records. You can reverse out deductions. You paid somebody an error, now you're reversing it, that kind of stuff. Absolutely. But in those cases, you might be taking money out of someone's account. So we're going to need an explanation, and we're going to need to make sure it looks reasonable. All right. One of the exceptions, your payroll system. If someone changes their name and they're an active employee, all right, they're going to the information they give you is going to be more reliable than the retirement system. So we're going to let you change their name in our system, but we are going to ask every time it's triggered that you take a look at it and just make sure they really did change their name. If Mary Street becomes Mary Smith, great, no problem, right? But if Mary Street becomes Jack McCoy, well, okay. That there's now maybe that's possible, obviously, but that's something to look into. Did Mary Street really become Jack McCoy? The times where it's something else it seems to be going on will probably be pretty obvious. All right, and of course, because we're letting you change their identity in our system, we need you to make sure you're looking at it. And then last but not least, members enrolling. Our good friends on the enrollment team, same people who are doing all those rate checks, they're doing their best to get all the members enrolled possible. When members join the MTRS, they're required by law to petition the system for membership. You've got to stay on top of them and make sure they do their process, okay? So that's going to remind you, okay, these people have been done, the registration portion was done by the employer, but the member has not yet enrolled. And when you're registering people, please, 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 I know I mentioned this in the registration program or the eligibility program, make sure you're emailing them from MyTRS so that they do their enrollments. Okay, we're seeing a bad level of compliance with that, which was kind of mind blowing. So please, we want to make sure we're emphasizing that. All right, so we're going to go to the demo in just a second, but I'm going to take one last opportunity to remind you that we have a reporting checklist. We're going to go through some of the stuff now, and that the reporting checklist requires that you check for the balance before and after, especially if you've messed around with any deductions. It's really important you're submitting as files that balance. So we're going to go to a demonstration now, but before we do, I just want to see if we have any questions.
No questions at this time.
All right. Hopefully I haven't put everybody to sleep. Okay. I'm going to shrink this down. I'm going to drag over an employer. So here we have, I just want to make sure I'm in the right of the two browsers. I am. So I'm going to use a browser in Edge. Now, when you're using MyTRS, can't say this enough. If you have the option of using Microsoft Edge over Chrome, always do so. Frankly, Chrome is just frustrating, uses a ton of memory. If you can avoid having other tabs up here so that you don't have things interfering with each other, for instance, if you're using like online software to do your payroll, like Munis or something, try to separate them out. So like if I'm going into a tab here, I might go to a new in private window. In Chrome, this is called Incognito. So I'm going to go to MTRS from this. And you can see it still works. If nothing else, you get prettier color contrast. So hey, who doesn't want better colors, right? So when you're in MyTRS here, again, if you want to click on online training and guides, a little plug for today's program and all the different videos we have here. But if we're going to go to sign into MyTRS, we're going to go back to the main employer page. I'm going to click on employer sign in. All right, so for today, going to be Andrea admin. Sign in today. Very good. Andrea is going to send in. Now you'll notice that we have two-factor authentication. Now, if you're accessing MyTRS in an in private or an incognito session, you're going to get this message every single time. I still think it's worth it. If you are doing a non-incognito or non-in-person session or in private session, if you're signing in from the same IP address, it will not require it every time. It will require it if you change to a different computer, or more specifically, if you have a different IP address. So depending on your IT setup, it may require it every time just because they give you a random IP. So, all right, we're going to put in our code. Good. Confirm. There we go. Blackboard Public Schools. Okay, so this is our main page. A quick nickel tour. Here we have all the different functions on the left-hand side here. These are our like to options. This is going to have all of our information. For those of you who work on retiree insurance, quick reminder, you only have till September 16th. Clock's ticking to get your stuff in for September. Now we're going to go to deduction reports. And then for those who want to just see a quick live calendar, I'm going to go to calendar first, just click in here. So this is what your calendar looks like when you're actually scrolling on it and stuff. So I'm going to go back over to deduction reports though, and we're going to start up our process. So I'm going to go into May. Now I mentioned before, whenever you go into a deduction report, this deduction report was sitting there already, right? Like if I just literally imported this, you don't have to hit validate on the way in. Any other time you're going into a deduction report, if it's been sitting in the editor, I don't care if it's been 2 hours, just go ahead and click a validate real quick on the way in. I'm going to confirm, yes, I really do want to validate it. Just wait for this to run through. Nobody wants to chase out-of-date errors, as I mentioned before. It has been validated successfully. Very good. And now we're going to choose to edit details. So now I'm in the deduction report. Now you can see when you're in the editor, all these little sorting things. There's a little icon at the top. It looks like a skewed pyramid, and then it's got the double arrow. So that's just to let you know that you can sort your deduction report however you want. You can sort it by, name. You can do it reverse order if you'd like. You can sort it by SSN if you'd like to. You can do it by record type, any of the fields that have this, okay? Now, the exact order isn't always going to matter anyway, because you might have a couple different ways of going about it. You'll see you have some functions at the top where you can copy records, you can add new, you can delete records if you had to for some reason. You can export your actual deduction report to an Excel file. Like, let's say your file doesn't match up to your payment. You're like, I can't figure out why. You can export your file to Excel and then maybe compare that to a report from your payroll system to figure out why it's not adding up. If you're doing a particular function, let's say you're trying to target a particular field, there's a customize columns option in here. You can move columns around and all that kind of stuff. One of the things I like to do typically is I'll hide the SSN and then I'll hit apply. Now, sometimes too, I'm going to have an example of this of somebody with a different name, so I'm not going to do it. But if I don't have any name changes, sometimes I like to hide the reported names and stuff, so the earnings slide a little bit to the left. So I'm just going to go ahead and close. But here now we've hidden the SSNs. We don't really need that for this demo. And it just, it allows you to see a little bit more of the deduction report when you're starting to look at your stuff. Now, towards the bottom, you'll see some other buttons here. So we can export out a summary report. I'm just going to do that real quick, make it appear. And depending on your settings, sometimes you'll get a different tab. In this case, I have it drop in as a download. So, and it went to my other screen. Let me grab that. So this just kind of, sometimes this can be a little bit nice to look into. A lot of people don't bother with this, and that's fine. But it kind of just lets you know how much trouble you're about to get into, right? You've got 119 records, you get 34 errors, and you kind of get used to your volume. Depending on your particular situation, you can have the same number of records in two neighboring towns, and they have different employment, practices, and maybe one allows for like more mid-year salary changes, or just had to hire more people in the middle of the year. Who knows? But you kind of get used to your volume. All right. Now, I'm going to do an exception report as well. Or actually, before I do the exception report, I want to note we haven't made any changes, but if we had and we don't want to commit them, as long as we haven't hit apply yet, you can always hit cancel and leave, and it won't apply any of your unsaved changes, okay? And then here are the two apply and save buttons I mentioned before. The only difference here is that apply will let you stay in edit mode and keep working on your report, and save is what you click when you're done, all right? Whenever you're leaving a report, do not hit X, because you will lock the report. You always want to go in with a save, and then that way it releases the report from the lock, okay? Now, when you're looking through your report here, I'm going to go to an exception report. Oh, actually, again, sorry, I'm going out of order. I do want to click into the filters first, just to show you how that works. And we're going to filter for some stuff after we pop up the exception report, but in the filters, so let's say you're really comfortable working on your deduction reports, and you're like, I don't really need the exception report. I want to just kind of plug through my errors and exceptions. Now, if you're not comfortable doing deduction reports yet, long term, this might be a better solution, but what I'd really suggest is that you not go this route immediately, and just start out by popping out your errors and exceptions report, okay? But the other thing you can do is you can also look for records by SSN, by name. Literally every field is searchable, okay? So please note that. All right, I'm going to close the filter though, and now we're going to go to the exception report. Again, it's going to pop open, and depending on your browser settings, I think sometimes when you go incognito, it requires you to save it out every time, so that can be a little frustrating. But I like to use, when possible, I like to use either Edge or Firefox, actually. I also, again, feel that those are both better than working in Chrome. I feel like you run into more issues with Chrome because it's a memory hog. All right, so I'm going to sort this out. I just like to, sort of decorate my report a little bit, make it more readable. I like to right-click on column F and just set it to 80. This is my personal preference. That way, I feel like the errors are wide enough that you can see them pretty well. I also like to wrap text, just kind of clean it up a little bit. I might add a notes section over here, that kind of thing. And the other thing I like to do, just me personally, I always like to put a header on a report to kind of make it look a little more grown up. So just make it bold here and just general account, Excel stuff. Yep, I made it. Oh, and then last but not least, in the view, I am going to freeze the top row. Okay, so now as I scroll through, that header is going to follow me. So this is what a typical exception report might look like. Now, you might not have all these errors, you might not have the variety, but if I did all the same errors, it wouldn't be a very good demo, right? So what you want to do is you want to take this exception report, and if you have the benefit of 2 screens, that would be swell, but we're going to stagger a little bit here, and just going to bring this up, and I like to stagger on corners. That's my thing. Make this just a little bit wider. I don't like to split screen because I feel like you kind of lose some of the usefulness. And I'm on a laptop, so it's particularly wide versus tall. But if you have the capability of having 2 screens, or if your employer hasn't thought of this, might be good to put a bug in their ear. You can do so much more work with 2 screens than with 1. I can't recommend it enough. So with that, we're going to look up Andrea Admin. Now, Andrea Admin's exception message here is, quite frankly, we're just giving you a heads up that her rate is on hold. So what this means is Andrea has joined the MTRS probably recently, but for whatever reason, she is being given a Retirement Plus election, and so her status is a little bit up in the air. We need Andrea to make a decision, okay? So it would not be surprising, or you should not be surprised if you see that Andrea is in this status. Sometime down the road, you might see that Andrea is at the wrong rate, right? Now, in theory, we would know about that, so we'd reach out and say, hey, please change Andrea's rate, that sort of thing. But that's what this exception message means. There's no action for you to take immediately. You might want to just make sure Andrea knows she's on hold. But aside from that, she should already be aware, though, because she would have been somebody from our Radar Plus team would have reached out to her. All right. So the next individual we're going to look at is Judith Agbalumo. So Judith has a base to salary error. Now, in our scenario here, we know that Judith was hired in February. So she's a mid-year hire, right? So we're going to go to Judith's record. She just happens to be on the first page, very convenient. And now, if you remember from prior training sessions, we have something called a service correction code. I'm going to zoom out one step. Hopefully this is still pretty viewable online. I'm going to move over to see Judith's records here. So now you can see what her error is here. So base to salary does not match, right? And you can also see the same message if you click into her little bubble. Okay, so again, this is just here. I just want to make sure folks know that that's an option. And if you move over, now, in this case, Judith works here. In some cases, she's going to show up on every report for the rest of that school year. And if we did the math out, we're going to show that Judith was prorated because she got hired in the middle of the year. Okay, makes perfect sense. We see these all the time. So we're going to go into the service correction codes. We're going to pick MH for mid-year hire. And now we're going to add a comment to say that Judith's a mid-year hire. But before we do, very important, always hit apply. Okay, now we've sent out a bulletin. I believe we've actually sent it out. If not, you're going to get a bulletin pretty quickly or pretty soon today, telling you that if you fail to hit that apply button before you go to do your comments, MyTRS is going to discard the fact that you picked the codes. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a minute with somebody else. But now that we know Judith's in there, so we're going to go in here to comments. I'm not sure why there were. Oh, it looks like somebody was. Hopefully somebody doesn't jump into your test scenario and add comments. All right, so. We're going to go, we're going to say Judith was hired Feb 2. Now, please provide a little bit better of a comment, or, Remember that a human being has to read this. Now I'm going to make mine pretty brief today, just because we have a lot of different scenarios to go through. But the better comment you provide us, the less likely we're going to have to reach out and call you. All right. The comments here, very important, right? Because you're going to have to do it for certain errors and exceptions. Otherwise, we're going to have to reach out and ask you, right? But sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where things are a little tricky. You're like, I don't know if I should go with this solution or that solution. So the key is to go with the one you think best fits the situation. And if you leave us a heck of a comment, you're going to put your employer services representative in a position where they might be able to fix it for you if you guessed wrong or if you misunderstood the situation, because they know exactly what's going on. And then that's a win-win for everybody, right? So they can fix it for you. They can reach out and say, hey, by the way, Andrea, if you run into the scenario, it should be this code and this is why, right? But it allows them to get through the report, it allows your report to get released. Everybody's happy. All right. Now, in our exception report, the next person's Amanda Apple. Amanda is coming through with an MTRS rate of 11 and a school rate of 8. And again, as I mentioned before, you have that coupled 2% deduction, right? Because if you're taking 8, but we think she's 11, so we think this 2% is a mistake, right? But again, if you look at the two together, if you're sending 8 plus 2, that would make perfect sense. So in this case, these are the scenarios where we're asking, let our team that's looking through everybody with bad rates, they'll reach out to you. Again, just around this election period, we don't want to jump to it. We will get to a point where you see these, we're going to ask you to make the changes right away. All right. But for now, we're still working on getting that election process straightened out. So please do not make a change here until we've asked you to. The key here is that this is a good rate. You'll always see 2 decimals, but if it's 7.99 or 8, those are real rates, okay? If it's ever 8.01, you know it's wrong because your payroll system will never take an extra penny, all right? Okay. So really, for Amanda, there's nothing to do here. You don't even have to comment on her. We're aware that the rate's off too. We'll get back to you on it. All right. So now the next person's Beth Biology. So again, Beth is our employee. We were kind of thinking to ourselves like, okay. So Beth's got a couple of errors going on here. First, the member's current employment's leave of absence. I mentioned this in the slideshow. This looks like the termination event, but it's really long. It's got a bunch of stuff. But basically, it's just saying, hey, look, if Beth's on leave of absence, why are you paying her, right? And she's got both checks showing up here, and they also have base salary errors. All right. So one little trick that I do like to share with folks is you're in your deduction report. You don't want to leave your deduction report, go all the way to the roster to check out Beth Biology. It's kind of a pain in the neck, right? So we are going to kind of cheat a little here, and we are going, this is a very good tactic, especially if you have 2 screens. I'm going to bring up another MyTRS session, okay? Now this first one is an Edge, and I don't want them to compete, so this one is opening Chrome. I know I mentioned Firefox before, and I prefer not to use Chrome. It's a long story, but I can't use Firefox for this demonstration. So I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to re-sign in as Andrea. So sorry, I get thrown off signing as in somebody else. Hopefully, none of you should have an alter ego, so you should be all set. Good. And again, 2FA because I'm in a different browser. Now, if you have like one outside of the report fix to make, it might not be worth all this. You might just want to save your report, go out to the roster, that kind of thing. But I know we're doing a demo. I know we have multiple stuff, especially if you're a bigger school district. Having sort of side-by-side browsers can be super helpful. So I kind of wanted to go through that exercise so you can see it. So in our Chrome browser, we're going to go to the roster, right? So the person we're having the issue with is Beth Biology. So let's go look up Beth. So we're going to go to our filter here in the roster, and we're going to look up biology. Good. There's Beth. Okay. So we're in the May report, and Beth's getting an error, and we know she's back from leave, so we don't know why she's getting an error. And then we realize, oh, shoot, Beth is back from leave, but we forgot to tell MyTRS Beth was back from leave. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. Hopefully you can see these events a little bit better. So this is the roster. We looked up an employee, and you can see all of her different employment events. So Beth had different leaves in the past, and now she's on leave, but she did return to work, okay? So we look up in our HR system, we realize, oh man, Beth came back on 419 and her effective pay date should have been 426, right? So, all right, let me go in and I'm going to edit Beth. And we're going to add in a contributing event. Okay, so we're going to say Beth is back at work. Beth returned on 419. Her effective pay date is going to be 426. Oops. Hopefully we'll key that better. I apologize. I'm not good at keying on a laptop. Now, I like to add in the new event. I like to start, we're returning you to contributing. This is when she came back. This is when it's going to affect payroll. Now, keep in mind, you can't have two events that have an open stop date, right? Because it's like, well, which one's in place? So I like to add in this new row, and then I like to go to end the new event based on what I've already put in, right? So I'm going to put in 418. Now, in this particular example, if you look these dates up, it's a weekend. So you might be saying to yourself, well, really, her last day on leave is Friday. It's not Sunday. These have to be back-to-back dates. We're trying to create an airtight timeline here. So I don't care if you do Friday, Saturday, Saturday, Sunday, Sunday, Monday. They just have to be back-to-back dates. I would say that the most logical date, the most important date is the fact she returns on this date. So make this Sunday, okay? Now, Beth is back. She's 100%. She's not on workers' comp, so that's going to stay 0. And Beth is a 10 contract term because she's a teacher, right? So we're good. We're going to hit save. And we've successfully updated her. And the best part is, because we use Chrome, a different browser, we are still in our deduction report here, right? Now, if we hit apply, though, and then we go check out Beth Biology, I hadn't filtered for Beth here, so I'll go grab her. Here, let's go grab her. And now, if I'm looking at Beth Biology in this deduction report, she still has her errors. And that's where I mentioned before that the correction, so this was the absolute right correction path. However, the correction happens outside of the deduction report. So the only way we're going to fix this, okay, is to go outside and hit validate so that it can see the roster. However, in Beth's case, she's a little bit of an exception to this rule. And that's because when Beth came back, we had to prorate her down. She missed some time. So we also have to pick return from leave for Beth. And because we're making a change on Beth, and we go ahead and hit apply after attaching those two codes, you're going to see it stays filtered on Beth here. Now, when we slide over, Beth's errors have turned to an exception or a warning. And if you click in here, you're going to see the exception saying, thank you for picking a code, and voila, Beth has been resolved. Right now, the last thing you want to make sure you're doing, don't forget this step. Beth is back. All right, woohoo. So we're going to hit comment. Very good. And we'll close out our comments. And it was important. We applied on Beth first. As you can see, it's resaving the report here. So if we hadn't saved the report, those codes we picked for Beth were going to disappear. All right. I'm not going to do a comment for every single one we solve, but I want you to see that's really the sort of step process you should be going through when you're submitting your reports. All right. So now next person is going to be Barbara Belligrapha. So we're looking at Barbara. She has a base earnings error, but she only has it on the 10th, right? So that's a little strange. So let's go look her up. Now, from our point of view, of course, when we're looking at it, we don't really have the info, the background info. You guys are I'm sure are going to remember because you had to make the adjustment in payroll. In some cases, you might not because you might be taking over for somebody else. Maybe you're working on a backlog, that kind of thing. So you might be as mystified as we are when you're first looking into the report. So we're going to hit apply. Now, again, this can seem like a little slower. It is particularly slower if I'm keying into a laptop and I only have the one screen to work off of, right? But if you have dual screens and you're working on your, your comfortable setup, you should be able to fly through some of this stuff. So especially once you've gained comfortability. So Barbara only has the error on her first deduction. We can see that her earnings are a little lower. Now, my scenario that I dreamed up, now you wouldn't be figuring this out from a logical standpoint. You'd be looking in your payroll system and be like, oh yeah, we docked her a couple days because she had to take a couple days off. So for that code, we're going to pick unpaid leave, okay? And even though you're thinking to yourself, well, come on, she only had a couple days off. It's not really an unpaid leave. Legally, it is. It is the entire unpaid leave happens within that check. And therefore, you're going to pick unpaid leave, and she's going to get full credit. We're going to hit apply. And in accordance with the statute, she gets free service up to 30 years for that leave. That's why we're marking it, and she's going to get full service to that time period, and her creditable service will be accurate. All right. So now she's good to go. You would make a mention in the comments, hey, she missed a couple days because of XYZ, that sort of thing. So Brenda Boss, next person. Again, one of these like MTRS rates, school rates, these errors combined look like they make sense. We're asking you not to do anything on these. So we're going to skip right over Brenda Boss. All right. Brenda Botany. She's the next person. We have back-to-back Brendas here. And we're going to look up Brenda Botany. And Brenda only shows up for the, the one paid 8. So I'm going to go up here. We're only going to put in part of Brenda's name because I'm trying to speed this up a little bit here. Now, when in doubt, good first step is always take a sip of coffee. So Brenda's only got the error message on 524. Probably looks like a pretty familiar scenario. That's because Brenda is another dock days person. So you're going to pick unpaid leave. You're going to go in, you're going to add a comment. Looks reasonable. We're good to go. So next person's Chris Calculus. Ironically, Chris's numbers aren't adding up. Now, again, another one of those scenarios where wrong rate. We think they're 9. You're taking 11. You're going to see that we're expecting 2% for them because if they were 9, we would expect a 2% deduction, but you're not sending a 2% deduction because they're 11%. And, this is that old, good old fashioned, 11 versus 9 plus 2. How the heck does that make sense? Keep in mind, 9 plus 2 equals 11 in the rest of the world, but in deduction reporting, specifically in the mass pension system, 11% is on all earnings, and it applies to people who are in the Retirement Plus election process, whether they're mandated or elected. 9 plus 2 is for folks who are not in Retirement Plus, and they started service after 1996. All right. Your local system, non-MTRS system, if you have one, 9 plus 2 would be the prevailing rate right now for brand new employees. So you're probably pretty familiar with it. Okay, so next person on our list, Virata Datal. Okay, so the deets on Virata looks like she has a couple things going on here. She failed to enroll. Come on, Virata. Based the salary earnings error, and she got an error message about being on leave of absence. There's all kinds of stuff going on, Virata, right? So again, we see this roster-related thing. Member is currently on LOA. So let's go check out Virata in our other browser, right? Now, little pro tip here, I'm going to copy her name because why type something if you can paste it? So this is our other browser. This is when we made the change to Barbara earlier, and we're in here. So I'm going to click back on my roster, and now we're going to look for Virata. So we're going to kill our filter, go up here, name our SSN. We're going to paste in Virata. We're going to hit apply. There's Virata. All right. So again, another employee that was on leave returns to this report. But you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, they came back in February. Why, what's going on with this? Why aren't they should have come back, on March 8th. Why are they showing up as an error on the report? Well, we're all human. So Virata's situation is that we keyed in the date wrong. Happens, right? So when you look at it this date, just be careful. So we're going to go in here and make this 3/24. Excuse me, we're going to make this 2024. And we're going to hit save. So again, we're on the roster. Virata's all set. Super fast fix. Awesome. So now we're going to come over here, though, because Virata had some other stuff going on. So let's look her up here and see why Virata is having trouble. All right, so we're going to hit apply, bring up Virata. And as you can see, it's just a progressive process. You're going to go through it. work through each of your records. Now, she's got errors. We know what her errors are based on an Excel spreadsheet. So we took care of this one. Now she still has a base of salary error. Well, we knew she was on leave, right? So you prorated her when she came back. So you're gonna have to pick a service correction code, right? So she was on leave, she come back, now she's prorated. So in this case, we're gonna go ahead and pick RL because she's returning from leave, okay? And she's been prorated for the year, so we're picking that code. Of course, we're gonna hit a comment. I'm gonna go into the comments here and we're gonna say, yeah, comment. Please, when you're leaving your comments, leave first and last name. I'm trying to make this quicker for the purpose of the demo. So it brought us back. I'm going to hit comment. So now I've posted it. I've saved it. Awesome. And now I come back, right? And I'm going to hit apply because I gave Verada her codes. And you'll notice, wait a minute, she's back to an error. She has no service correction code. So this is the thing we're sending the memo out about. This is probably the most common time you're going to run into it. Hopefully we will get this fixed, but it's surfaced more than once. So I want to make sure I'm emphasizing in this training video. Always, when you go in, apply your codes, don't lose what you worked on. It'll take a second for it to apply, and then you can go in and add your comments, and this will not happen to you, okay? Because it's already applied, so the save is committed to the report. Okay, awesome. So with that, we know we fixed Verada. We're going to wait for that to refresh, so we'll know. We're going to cheat. We're going to look up that Emma Easel is yet another person who was on leave of absence. There's something in the water here at Blackboard. Okay, so she's got RL. Again, she's member enrolled, base to salary. Awesome. So let's go look up Emma Easel. I'm going to go back to my Chrome, bring up Emma. Go to the roster here. You can click on the roster there too if you want to. Go into my filter. Now you're going to notice I didn't clear the filter first. I'm just going to go look up Emma. And you'll see that it replaced Verada with Emma. So you don't have to do that other step where you do it, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like if we did. So here we've got Emma Easel. No big surprise here. Emma needs to be returned from leave. Great. Hit edit. We're going to add an event. She's going to be contributing. And Emma, you should know this from your payroll system, but Emma comes back on 4/28. In our scenario, her effective pay date is going to be 5/10. And she is also coming back full time. She might come back part time. So if that's the case, you want to make sure you're entering that in properly. You're going to choose 10 for her pay, her contract term. We're going to go ahead and hit save. Now, in this case, I added in her new event, but I failed to put in the stop date for her previous event. So we have two that are open, and that's the exact error message you're going to get. Stop date is required for the prior event. So, oops. So this should be 4/27 because she came back on 4/28. All right. And hit save. Very good. Successfully saved. Awesome. So when we come back in here, now we're going to look up Emma here, and we're not going to search there. This is so misleading. I'm sorry that there is a search bar here. It's like totally useless. But we're going to go to the name. Drop in Emma Easel. We're going to hit apply. Wait for it to refresh. Sip coffee. Here we are. We still have our two. So just like we did in the previous case, we're going to pick RL here. Repetition's the mother of skill. Very good. And hit apply. And then again for Emma, we would go in and add a comment too to say Emma's also back. Awesome. She came back on such and such a date, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, when we're looking at Emma Easel, we're going to look at these exceptions, and we're going to see that she has 7%. School rate should be 11. So in addition to her other error, she also had the situation where she had a MTRS rate issue. Now, what's important here, we got one of these sneaky devils, right? So if we were looking back at our exception report, Emma did have this problem, but she also had the one that sometimes people overlook. And that's this bad boy right here. Emma has a weird rate. Sounds like an Aerosmith song. So here she's got school rate 18.26%. I assure you, your payroll software doesn't randomly take 18%, right? So we know something's afoot. So let's go look up, so of course, we're not going to theorize it if if you're the school district, you're going to look up her payroll and say, what the heck's going on? However, I dropped a hint in this little demo here, and we have $1,500 showing up in the ineligible field. Now, I can tell you when you're employer services, this is gold to you. You're like, wait a minute, what's up with that $1,500, right? So if it is ineligible, you've over deducted Emma. We have to give her a refund in a future payroll. In this particular scenario that we drew up, it's that fact that this was an eligible stipend and either the wrong code was used or maybe the code isn't programmed right. We're going to go ahead and put that in the stipend fields. We're good to go. We're going to hit apply. I apologize. These applies are taking longer than when I timed out our demonstration here. And so what you're going to see is that will solve the problem, right? So now we look at this pay date. She just goes back to having the good old fashioned 7 versus 11%. And again, 10.99 is fine. That just means it's like a fraction of a penny, and it should always be under. If you ever have 11.01, I know that sounds silly, but your payroll system will never take too much. And so that's a good sign that that something else is wrong. Something else is just slightly off. All right. Now we fixed Emma Easel. Now the next person I'm going to look up really quickly is going to be Ima Fine, right? So we're looking up Ima. And I'm going to go in here. And Ima has an error message saying her name and SSN don't match. And if we're looking at Ima, this is the case where you just want to go in and check it, make sure she looks okay. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, so Ima Fine became Ima Good. Okay, so it looked like she either got married or divorced or for some reason just wanted to change her last name. Why not? So you can see that that's exactly what you're going to be doing in this scenario. Now, if you're catching up on reports, let's say you have 5, 6, 7, 8 reports, you're catching up, whatever the number is. Once we release a report where she is Ima Good, the system will stamp with her new name, and every report after that, once it's saved, she'll no longer keep coming up as an exception. But if you have 5 or 6 and they're all waiting to be looked at or something, it is going to repeat itself until we release that first report where her status changed. All right. The deduction report itself will update it. And it's kind of a symptom of just the fact that there's a lot of schools with backlogs. Okay. Now, in our exception report, Francois French, he's just simply somebody you need to poke and make sure he goes in and enrolls. Okay. Now, the next person on our list is Luisa Lamanzana. And Luisa's got a couple things going on. And one of the things she has here that sticks out to me is that she's got duplicate records. So we're going to go ahead and look up Luisa. Whenever you're going through your deduction report, I can't say enough, copy the names. So we're going to go back to our filter. You can see I'm picking up speed a little bit, hopefully with your comfortability. And we're going to hit apply up here. Okay, so Luisa's first record looks great. Now we're looking at her second record and we're like, what's going on? Why would she have 2 records, right? So we're going to slide over a little bit, see what we learned. Now, if you're the payroll person, you probably know what's going on with Luisa, right? You probably saw her name, rolled your eyes and said, oh God, all right, here we go. So Luisa is a teacher, but she's also the soccer coach, okay? So Luisa being a soccer coach here she's a principal and a soccer coach. And so she's got 2 different paychecks because for whatever reason, your school district doesn't adhere to the IRS's rule and paying it all in one check. And so now you've got 2 records showing up, right? So what you want to do to the second record is you have to mark it a retro record because this is a 27th check. By 27th, I mean her pay frequency is 26. That's the pay frequency for our example school district. This is going to be an extra check. Right. So if 2% is due on it, it's going to be, a standalone as if it were a stipend. And it's not going to get additional credible service because it's a stipend only payment, right? It's not base pay. And so we need to make sure the system knows, okay, this is separate from that. And essentially the system's going to treat it as if you would put the 2 records together in a lot of ways. All right. So we're going to hit apply. Retro record, if she's being paid as a coach, probably not going to bug you about a comment on that. Unless you're paying her such a crazy amount of money as a coach that we're going to say, why do you pay your coaches so much? Something like that. But $6,200 to be the coach, you can see, okay, that record no longer has that issue. It is going to tell you though, wait a minute. She's a 9+2 member and you didn't take 2% on any of that coaching pay. Sometimes this happens because you're doing that separate check thing the IRS doesn't want you to do. So in this case, you're going to see that you have to do a makeup deduction for the, have to reach out to Louisa and say, geez, we paid you your coaching pay. We didn't take a 2%. We're going to have to hit you for an adjustment. Okay. And you'll do that on a future payroll. And you want to make sure you comment that you've already made those arrangements with Louisa.
Bobby?
Yes.
We do have a question kind of relevant to what you were just talking about.
Okay.
We have a teacher being paid during the summer for extra days per contract. How do you correct this error? So it's kind of relevant to the retro record.
Absolutely. So just like we were mentioning, if you have someone who's being paid out on the summer, now I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to assume this isn't just, money being paid on one of their checks. They're either a lump sum or they're in like a 21 pay situation. It's an extra check during the summer, right? Because that's why you're getting the error. The whole point is that it's off schedule. So they're lump sum, but now you're getting this thing and they have no base pay. It's just some sort of a payment, a stipend. So first, if you're doing extra days, we'll say they're a guidance counselor. Now, as far as the eligibility of this, please see the regular compensation training we did. I'm not going to get into any further into the eligibility of it. However, the payment would go in the stipend field, presuming it's eligible. The base, of course, would be 0 in this scenario, and you would want to switch the status to retro, just like we did in this check. It is an extra check, and that will allow for it. Now, you should have a comment in for that one, right? Because that's going to look weird. Now, if you have 600 people and they're all being paid longevity on the same pay date, we have a large school district and they do this every August. They have one payroll, they pay all their longevity. They're a massive school, right? We don't need 800 comments. Good Lord. We need one comment saying, hey, we paid everybody longevity. And so they make all those records retro, hopefully in their payroll system somehow. And then, they're going to have earnings in the longevity field for each of those records. They have the associated deduction. It works like clockwork. It's part of their August report every single year. So, that would be that kind of situation. Now, you'll see, though, going back to this example. So Louisa had her second record, but this looks peculiar. Why does she still have an error? It says there's a duplicate. Well, it's not a duplicate anymore because now we have a normal and a retro. This goes back to that thing where I was mentioning you got to go out and hit validate, right? Because this record hasn't been worked on. And so it doesn't know that the issue's been resolved. This record does, but this one doesn't because it only looks at the records that you change. So there's a little cheat code for this very specific information here. So we're going to go ahead and just put an F for fake in her middle initial. We're going to hit apply. Wait for that to update for a second. Now, if you have a ton of these, it doesn't make sense. But if you have one, this is a nice little, then you're going to delete your F here and you can hit apply. And you'll see that MyTRS now knows, oh, Louisa, there's no duplicate anymore. Nice little pro tip right there if you only have one or two or a situation where you're doing this with coaches, okay? Now, if you're doing something crazy like your calendar wasn't existed, good Lord, don't do this to everybody. Save the report, go out, hit validate, and it'll take care of it for you, all right? So Louisa is good to go. Of course, she just needs a comment, and we'll go to the next person on the list. So the next person is Amina Lapis. Amina has based the salary errors on both of her pays. Now, in this particular case, Amina is a mid-year hire, so she's getting prorated on all her different pays. So if we look her up, we're going to go into, steal her name here, go into our filter, grab her name, hit apply. Here's Amina Lapis. She's showing up twice. Again, mid-year hire. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick MH, both codes. We're going to hit apply. We're going to add a comment saying that Amina was hired on February 15th, and that's why she got prorated, okay? Now, I'm going to skip over that part of it. I'm trying to pick up for a little bit of expediency here. The saving is taking longer than when I time this out. So I'm going to go ahead and grab Sandra Maka. We're going to go up to comment here and drop in for Sandra. Hit apply here. So Sandra's our next person, and on the exceptions report, she's got a similar situation to what we just looked at a few minutes ago. So we're looking at Sandra, and again, you probably know these folks, right? So here's Sandra. We're going to look through here, and geez, another coach. Same scenario we ran into before. This should not be a big surprise, right? So we're going to go in. Now, if you know you have people in this situation and this is the pay status that you do, you might want to target these people on the way in, right? I mean, that might be a way to do it. You know, maybe look for everybody with coaching pay and fix them up front, right? And then go out and hit validate and you get everything else cleaned up. Again, we're going to drop in our F up here. We're going to hit apply. We're making it retro because it's an extra pay. Of course, we would be adding a comment. Doing this real here. All right, and now we're going to go back into Sandra's record here because we don't want to just leave her with a fake middle initial once this releases. Once it finishes updating. We'll check our exception report while we wait for that. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick stock here. We're going to see the next person's Milagros Maestra, and she has just somebody that needs to enroll. So we want to, you know, kind of reach out to Milagros, say, hey, what's going on? Please make sure you take care of this. We've got Mary Math. Again, another person where her RAND PRS rate and her school deduction rate don't match, but it's a nice, good, even rate. So we're going to ask you not to really take any action on that. We're going to get into the math family here. So we got Molly and then there's Maria Mathematica. So Molly here on Molly Math, she's double base earnings. Again, for the sake of time, actually, I'm going to show you this one because this one's a little bit different, but we are still spinning. We come back to this. We'll talk about this for a minute here. So Maria Mathematica, again, full-time percentage. So little spoiler alert on this one. We would go into the system. We're going to change. We would change our FTE percentage. I wanted you to see like a good variety of different error messages. So, you know, we try to mark some of them up. But I think for the sake of timing here, we're not going to fix every single one of these. However, I do want to bring you to, so for Molly Math, the key with her is that she has two different sets of base earnings here, but it looks like our report, let me try hitting F5. Yeah, okay, I went into a tailspin. So I'm going to go back into edit mode. Now the last person I had made a change to was Sandra Maka, so we're going to bring Sandra up. We can see that that last change I made to her didn't take, so we're going to go ahead and hit apply. But her other changes did take, so we're good. It seems to have just sort of spun out of control while we're doing that. I'd say to give it about 30 seconds, but if it spins longer than that, you know, like kill your session, you can hit F5, which is the refresh button. And if it's going to come back up, it'll come back up and be okay. If it closes itself, you know, kind of spun out of control and you just have to sort of reopen the pop-up, okay? Everything you've been applying, though, is here. So we have all our comments, all the codes we already picked. We're okay with that. I would not give it more than 30 seconds. You'll never get those minutes back in your life, and I apologize that it even happens. So now we're going to go to, oh, wait, we're supposed to go Molly. Yeah, okay. So some of these are repeated, so I'm not going to walk you through each one of them. I do want to show you Molly, though, because she's a good example of something that happens a fair amount. But I do also, you know, I'm trying to balance being mindful of people's time. So hit apply here. Reason I wanted to show you Molly is because Molly's a mid-year hire, right? But if you're looking, knocked my earbuds out, sorry. So if you're looking at Molly, you might notice that she has two different base earnings amounts. And that's because she's not only mid-year hire, but she's also somebody who got docked pay. And so you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute. A mid-year hire requires the mid-year hire code. But the docked pay code requires unpaid leave. So which one do you use? So I'd say when in doubt, if you find yourself in this situation, for the period where she was docked pay, pick that code. And for the period, and for her other one, you're going to have to pick the mid-year hire, okay? This is going to give her a smidge more service, but she's legally entitled to full service being mid-year hire, so she shouldn't be over-prorated. And that's what the solution to this is going to be. Then you want to make a note, because it's going to look weird to your employer services rep. Hey, why do they have two different codes? So just explain, she's normally mid-year hire, but we also docked her, so that's why we picked the pay in accordance with the, you know, the training video, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply on this, and we're going to see that her two errors are going to go away, and we'll kind of cherry pick a little bit because we still have the June report to look at. And there's just one particular thing in June I want to show you. So here we go. We're in a good position with that. Now I want to look at, I think 2 more people on this May. We're not going to finish all of the May report, but we will get through most of it. Aaliyah Pizarro, I'm going to bring her up. And in her scenario, you can see she has both pay periods here, but the error message she's getting says that her school rate, again, is 8.31. So this is not the situation where it's like 8 versus 9 here. 8.31 doesn't make sense. So if you go look at her record, and then obviously you guys are paying them, right? So look in your payroll system. What happened here, right? So in this particular case, she's a guidance member. Believe it or not, we're paying her for doing extra days as a guidance person, even though it's May. They seem to do it over spring break for some reason in this particular school. I find it strange, but this is a real example. Obviously not Elia, but a real example pulled from a real payroll file in May. And so they were paying them an extra $1,000. Now, because it didn't happen over the summer, the school was confused and was like, I guess it doesn't count, right? Even though it's in the contract, they were paying the exact same summer days. They just did in April. I have no idea why they do it in April, but that's what they did. I've never seen this before. But having said that, they used the right code, so it did pay it, but they didn't take any MTRS deductions on it. So in this case, if this amount being paid had no deductions on it, you would make a comment saying, hey, that $1,000 really was an eligible stipend. It was for the extra days. They did it during the summer. It's in the contract. Here's the information, yada, yada, right? Now, if this was ineligible, obviously just move it to the ineligible field. Make sure you have a 0 in there, and then you're good to go, right? Because then the math will math. But if this was eligible and you didn't take the deduction, then you want to make arrangements with your employee to do the makeup. Make sure your assigned employer services rep knows what's going on in the comments, all right? Rachel K. Tao is going to be somebody who's a mid-year hire. I'm going to quickly look at Savannah Superintendent because we do not duplicate this issue in the June report. I always want to go to the wrong search. Creature of habit. All right, we're going to hit apply. So for Savannah, her error is going to come up on just her first pay date. And the reason she's coming up, it seems we've accidentally deleted Savannah's other record, so I'm thinking she's going to show up in more than one place. What did I do? Oh, because I have errors checked by accident. Okay. So again, always look at your filters. I thought it was weird she didn't have both her records. So she's got both of her records here, and only one of them has an error. So in looking at this scenario, again, ripped right from a deduction report, she got a raise. She has a retro portion here, but the payroll system is going to fill in the new salary, right? So there's 2 ways you could reserve this. The best way to fix this is you really should be putting her old salary in here, all right? If you don't have that available, I don't know why you wouldn't. You really should have it. I mean, so we should be able to go right into this record here and simply put in the amount of what her salary was, which is $180,000, right? So that's one thing you could do. And if you correct the data, you do not have to pick a service correction code. You fix the data problem, right? So we're going to go ahead and hit apply. Now, if for some reason you can't access that salary, or maybe you're working on a really old report, you didn't work there at the time, and you can't figure out what it was before, though theoretically you should be able to look at the previous report and see what it is if you really had to. We will accept a service correction code of SC there. But this shouldn't be the norm, all right? This should be like, oh, I couldn't find it, that kind of thing. So the SC code of SC, I know, terrible. I can't believe I didn't see that when we were picking out the names. But this would be an example where it's salary related. It's not creditable service related. It really is just a salary change. And it's the fact that the new salary is plugging in instead of the old. Now, we don't need this because we were able to fix the salary. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. And we are good to go with Savannah Superintendent. On our exception report, Tavika Tavali is going to be somebody who needs to enroll, and she was a mid-year hire. That's why she hasn't enrolled yet. So we want to get on top of her about that. And we'll go to Dave Whistle, and then we're going to look at Tanya to see why Tanya is missing. So Dave Whistle, bring him up, see what his deal is. I'm guessing by his name, you kind of have an idea of what his situation is. Let's apply. Little Roy Kent shout out there. What's up? All right. Now, Dave, well, his only record is this one. right? So we're going to look through and see what's going on with Dave. So Dave's at 9 plus 2 here. He's got coaching pay. And part of Dave's issue here is he should be reported with a coach's pay frequency. He is only a coach in this school district, right? So his pay duration should be 3 because he gets paid over a 3-month season. He's going to get, now this is listed as 6. I just chose that, but really it should be 1. He only gets 1 check for the whole season. Now, if you're paying somebody biweekly for the 3-month period, then 6 would be the right one. I had somebody call me and they're like, oh man, but it's 7. 6 is fine, right? This tells the system to ignore the payroll calendar. They're not going to get credible service. They are just a coach, okay? You want to make sure they have the position code of coach. Their annual salary is not going to matter. But for a coach, right, you're going to see this error message here. Coaches don't get creditable service for being coaches. They're only eligible as a coach only if they're a MPRS member through another district or through yours, of course, right? So they're not getting creditable service to this. What they're getting is they're going to get additional regular compensation, right? Because they're already getting their credible service in their primary employment. So what we're going to do here is this person is the coach and they have an FTE here. So we're going to go ahead and slide over. We're going to make this FTE is going to be 0. And then we're going to slide back over here and we're going to make them a retro record. Now we're going to hit apply. Hopefully that cleans out all the different error messages. Very good. Now we have one more error message. Apparently I missed this during setup. I think in this situation, we actually have to register Dave as a member. So we're going to go ahead and skip that for now, just for the purpose of the demo, because I want to go on to the June report. So let's ignore the fact that that exists. Let's say that this was all set and that was your last issue. We're going to move on to your missing members. Now, sometimes when people have missing members, it's kind of funny, but what they'll do is they'll try to look them up in the filter, right? So we're going to look for Tanya in our filter, in our deduction report, even though the system says she's missing, right? So we're going to go in here, I'm going to pop up. And I get this question fairly often from newer folks from time to time. They go in, they hit apply. They're like, look, I have a missing member and I looked her up on the report and I can't find her. Yeah, because she's missing. That's what the error message means, right? So we're going to now go up in her file and say like, okay, what's the deal with Tanya? So we're going to click into the roster here. I clicked on registered employee by accident. We're going to hit cancel. We're going to go into our filter. I'm going to look up Tanya. Hit apply. Here's Tanya. All right, what's the deal with Tanya? What's her status? Now, you probably know this, right? And this is probably going to take a look in your payroll system, too. You got it. So Tanya came back. She's not on the May report. Why not? Now, this might be a situation, maybe it's a glitch with the payroll system. You didn't, if you have a certain vendor who remain nameless that has an MTRS tab, if you don't populate it properly, she won't show up on the report. But you probably would have found that when you compared your report to your payment, right? So if you're looking at Tanya, you might notice that when she came back from leave, you set her up, you started paying her, and then, oops, you didn't turn on her MPRS deduction code. So this is an important function of what the missing members allow us to do. It allows us to see that you have somebody who's active, they should be taken, and you failed to take a deduction from Tanya's pay. So if Tanya is back in pay status, and that part is correct, A, you want to immediately go to your payroll system and turn her deduction back on. Next, you want to make sure you add a comment saying that Tanya is a missing person. She really did return to pay status. This is what her earnings were, and we failed to turn on her MPRS deduction by accident. Now, we're not going to wag a finger at you. It happens. We're all human. We're all super busy, and it's totally easy to not turn on the deduction. But for Tanya's sake, let's make sure we get that resolved as quickly as we can, note it on the report, and then reach out to Tanya to say, we got a problem. Looks like, we're going to have to set up some kind of an arrangement to take makeup deductions for you, okay? MTRS will try to be pretty flexible for you as far as like letting you do makeup deductions for the employee. Obviously, it's in everyone's best interest to get that taken care of right away. However, if it's been a long time, I have a district that, they were behind on the reports and they missed this for like 15 months or somebody. You can't do that as makeup and deductions. Like it's a lot of money, right? So they're going to have to get billed. They're going to have to, come up with a process. I think they're going to sign up to their local OBRA plan, their SMART plan, and make voluntary contributions and roll the money over later. That can be a nice solution for that kind of a process. But hopefully you find this, and the sooner you find this, the better, and it minimizes the damage. All right. So that's what you want to do with missing. Now, let's say Tanya was missing, not because she was enacted, but let's say she was a contributing member. She terminates, and you haven't terminated her in MyTRS. Well, that'd be different, right? You'd bring up your Chrome session here. You would add a termination event. You would say, oh yeah, she terminated. The effective pay date for that's 5/10, et cetera, et cetera. Now MyTRS going forward will say, oh, okay, she's not missing. She left. Great. You'll have to come back. You'll have to hit. In this case, there's no sort of record to get around it. So you're going to have to save your deduction report. And if you had added in a termination event for her, we're just waiting for this to save now. And then you would have to go in and hit validate again. Okay. And that would recheck against the rosters, and Tanya will no longer show as missing. All right. Now, I know we're going over a little bit. We've actually already gone over. I just want to look at one last thing in the June report. I will try to make this as expeditious as possible. In the June deduction report, what you're going to find a lot of times, so again, we're going into June, we're hitting validate because we're following the rules. And in the June deduction report, we're going to see some stuff, but we're also going to see something a little different. Now, we're going to go ahead and now sometimes, by the way, you can run your exception report before you even go into your deduction reports. I'm going to cheat here. It's not really cheating, but I'm going to go in here. It just feels more fun when you say cheating. And we're going to pop open our exceptions report. So now we've got the one for June. And because we still had May's opened, it popped up. And my other one's on my other screen, and it won't let me drag it. Here we go. Okay. Now this is the June exception report, right? So I'm going to do the same things I did with the other one real quick. Make that a little bit bigger. Bring these over, center them, set this to 80, column width 80. Enter. I'm going to wrap my text. Take this. I'm going to drop it. I am going to take this, since I have one open already, and I want to waste the least amount of time for you possible. And then I'm going to do view, freeze the top row. Okay, here we go. We're in business. So now you're going to see a lot of these people are the same, right? Because a lot of the stuff carries over. Chris Calculus is still off. Verada Detal, she's still in here. She still has, situation going on with being returned from leave, all that kind of stuff, right? Sometimes you'll see new errors, right? And then what's key here is you're on a June report. And sometimes when you're in a June report, it's good to kind of just take an overall look, right? And what you'll see is when you're looking at all these new names, Algebra wasn't on the previous report. Gianna Gessa wasn't on the previous report. What's going on here? Why, where are all these new people here? Like as we scroll down, Penelope Plume is new. We got Theano Theory. So looking at this, what you'll see here is, well, this is curious. You have a pay date on 6/7. You have a pay date on 6/21. You get the 6/28 pay date. And everybody on it has two errors. It says that they have a base to salary error, and it says that their pay date can't be found in the district calendar. You guys may recognize this, but if we go into the deduction report, now there are a couple of different ways you can target this, but I'm trying to get people out of here as soon as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort by pay date a couple of times, because I want to float that June 28th to the top. Okay, everybody on this date has an error message. Now you're the payroll person, so you're probably like, oh, geez, this is my lump sum date. You already knew this, right? No big surprise here. Everyone's getting paid a boatload of cash, and that's because they're being paid out their lump sum. So if you remember when we talked about this previously, in your payroll calendar, so we're going to bring that up in a separate browser. In your payroll calendar, you have to mark off your lump sum pay date. So we're going to go here, and the date for the lump sum, you probably know this because you're a payroll person. You remember that the heck you went through on that pay date. But the purpose of this, so that everybody's following, you had a 6/7 record, a 6/21, and 6/28 is missing. Okay, so this is an example where we have to add a calendar date. We're going to add in our date. We're going to say it's 6/28. And we're going to do a better job keying it. That was absolutely terrible. 6/28, 2024. Okay, better job. And we're not going to check it off as a summer pay date, though, right? And that's probably a little counterintuitive when you're first doing it. You're like, what? Why wouldn't it be a summer pay date? It is the lump sum. Mind you, MyTRS needs to know which one is the lump sum, so it is always going to be the last date that is not checked before you start checking off your summer dates. So this lump sum check is going to be these checks here. And this, in our particular school district, forgot to go into edit mode, pardon me. So in our particular school district, 6/28 is our lump sum date, and our summer checks are actually, we're paying about 7/5, 7/19, 8/2, 8/16, and 8/30. Now you might say to yourself, well, I mean, this is an extra check. That's going to be okay. Okay. MyTRS is going to account for the fact that you just have that extra check in there. So we're going to go ahead and hit save. Very good. So now your payroll counter has been set up properly. Now we're back at the deduction report. You hit apply. You're like, all right, I'm good to go. Waiting for it to refresh. And you're like, great, that was useful. It didn't fix anything, right? And again, this is that situation where we mentioned the payroll counter exists outside the deduction report. So you're going to want to save it. And hit validate. Say yes. These green things are well meant, but sometimes I feel like they're a nagging parent helicoptering over you. Okay, so I'm going to hit this, go back into the edit details screen here, and I'm going to let this finish refreshing. This little, sort of like Knight Rider thing going on there, that's just telling you it's still thinking, so it's good to let it do its thing. I'm going to go back into pay date. I'm going to click it twice, so it's ascending, then descending, and now you're going to see this person still has a basis salary error. What on earth is going on with this person? So if we go over to this person, we're going to see, oh, they have a bad pay duration. According to the system, you're going to pay them over July and August. So all the people who had lump sum, we're going to have to pick the pay duration as lump sum. I am not going to fix all 13 people that I put in this situation. We're going to fix 4 of them just so you can see what it looks like, right? Okay. Now, slide them over to the left. So we fixed the first 4 people. Now we're going to hit apply. I mentioned that is important. When you're going in, you have lump sum on all your lump sum people. Okay. And as you can see, these people came up fine, and you still have a couple of people here that are coming up as an error. So I intentionally designed this so that you could see. Now, in this particular case, we had people that were not only lump sum, but they had something docked from their pay. So even though they have lump sum on their record, even though it's properly checked off, and if everything were okay, they would go through fine, these people are still going to need a service correction code. And that's because in this situation, they had one person had docked pay, another person had return from leave. So they will still need service correction codes, even though it's a lump sum, not because the system doesn't know how to account for a lump sum. These first 2 people are fine, but these folks here, they had some situations, right? And so that's why they're going to need a service correction code, even though those other steps were taken. I wanted to make sure you saw what that looked like. So we're going to skip by the other people on this because it's really just rinse repeat, right? And for the people who need a service correction code, they're going to need that too. But again, I'm running a little late here and I don't want to hold you up all day. So the other things that were a little different here is we had a couple of people that we ran into a situation in the previous report, and let me just go find them real quick. They were our coaches. Pardon me. Apparently I don't know the alphabet. Wait a second. What was on this June? Just looking through all my different things so that I do not just sort of redundantly go through all the different things you'd have to fix. I wanted you to see things like mid-year hire. That's our stuff you're going to have to pick redundantly on each of the reports. Somebody who has the makeup installment, Louisa Lomenzini. All right. So if we look up Louisa, I must have went right by this error message. I apologize. Louisa has a special error message, right? And it is unauthorized installment payments received. So again, we're not going to go through every single person for the point of the fact that I'm running behind. And again, I apologize for that. Let's go ahead and Go into the June report. We're going to look up Louisa. We're going to hit apply. Now, Louisa, if you remember from the previous report, she didn't have her deduction come out right? She didn't have 2% on her coaching pay. So we said you're going to have to make an arrangement for her to have her 2%. And this is a little bit of a pro tip I like to give people when they're in that situation. So this is a $124 makeup deduction to fix the fact that she was short deducted back in May. So if we were looking at the May report as we were going through it, and if you remember, Louisa had the error message where she had the duplicate records, and then when we fixed that, one of them said the 2% was too low. So if you're keeping good notes, you'll always remember why you did a makeup. Now, if you take any makeup deductions using, some payroll system still calls it a repay deduction. Some of them call them an installment deduction. All of the compliant payroll systems have a third code, okay? And you can use this as your makeup code. Now, when you do, you'll see you get an error message, right? But if you remember correctly, if you read through the manual, every time you do a makeup, you have to itemize it, right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this record and we're going to copy it. Voila. Now we have another record, right? So now what we need to do is, this is makeup for the previous month. So we copied it, so we don't have to enter in every field. So we're going to make one of them an adjustment. And in the adjustment, there was this particular adjustment was 2% only, so there's no regular deduction amount. We're going to cut the installment data here because that was a makeup 2% deduction. So we're going to make it 0 here. Now, obviously, we don't want to report the same money twice. So now we're going to 0 it out on the original record. Okay, very good. Now the earnings here, there's no earnings. So we're going to put in $1. Okay, there's no earnings that need to be fixed here, but you do have to have an earnings. So we're just going to put in $1 there. It's an adjustment record and the period date here. Now, it was 5/24 that the error existed on, so we're going to say 5/24/2024 as the period date. The pay date, this is the date that the fix was done, but this is what it backdates to, okay? Now we're going to hit apply. So now you no longer have the money in the installment field. And what's nice about taking it as an installment deduction is you don't have to do any math. You can take it as a makeup 2%, but then you have to figure out the math. Okay, this much was the regular 2%. This is how much the adjustment was. You still have to copy the record and build it out this way. But if you take it as an installment payment, you don't have to do the math, which just makes your life a little simpler. It'll also show up as a separate line item in the person's check. So hopefully they'll have fewer questions. Like, you'd be surprised. People forget 2 weeks later, wait, why did you take an adjustment? Whereas if they have it show up as a repay, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. You had to take an extra 124 out because of that last check. And this is how you report an adjustment record. There is a specific tab on the written instructions in the MyTRS manual on how to do these, but I wanted to make sure that we covered that. And this would be an example of that, okay? And there's one other exception, I think, that I want to make sure we cover. A lot of this is going to be, really built to be just redundancy. So you could see, the same people showing up as a problem in one report. We're going to continue to be a problem in the next report. We're going to look at Paul Pencil, though. He'll be the last record we look at. And then we're going to rerun our exception report just to see something else, okay? So on the June report, I don't know why I minimized that, sorry. I'm going to grab Paul Pencil here, not Patrick, it's Paul. And go up here. For those of you who know Patrick and Paul Pencil, you're a hoot. Okay, so Paul Pencil's in here. And the reason we have for Paul Pencil here is we're getting a warning. And it's, again, one of these weird, skewed rates, right? It's off. Now, this is a scenario we're seeing a lot recently, right? So if we look over at the deductions, what we're going to get back from the school is, well, yeah, we docked them a couple days. Sometimes we even get this. They're like, oh, yeah, we docked them a couple days. We used a docking code. Okay, when you're using a docking code, you have to make sure the docking code maps to the base field. Because in this particular case, Paul was just out a day. He gets paid $75,000, so daily rate's $420.66. So his base pay here should not say 29.12. If you were looking at his actual check, it's going to say 24.91.57. Right? And that's what the problem is. The problem is that the docking code is not mapping to the earnings appropriate, right? So quick fix, no problem. Look them up in your payroll system. But it's important when you're going through the exception message. Do not float over that message because, again, skewed rates need to be resolved. If you're submitting them to us and we have those odd rates and we can't get a quick answer, we're going to have to send you back the report because it's not in compliance. Now, if it's a real skewed rate, like the person at the $1,000 that we talked about earlier, and it's like, oh, we really didn't take a deduction, then you give us a comment, you leave it skewed. We're not asking you to lie on your deduction report. You always report what really happened, accounting standards here. But if it's that the earnings are wrong because your docking code doesn't work, you got to fix the earnings, right? And then what you'll see here is that error goes away and they get the base to salary error they should have gotten. We put in the exception code we have, voila, it's all set. So we're going to hit apply on this. I think I already did, but just in case, you can never apply too many times. And then last but not least, we're going to just run the exception report one last time. And the reason we're running the exception report one last time is I just want to show you one last condition. I don't know what happened there. Okay, I'm going to hit the exception report. It's trying to open it here. I'm not sure why it's doing this. Okay, here we go. And here we have our exceptions report. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole sorting thing, but in theory, you're going through your deduction report. You want to make sure you resolved everything, right? Like if I thought I was going to submit this, I have another thing coming. I still have lots of mid-year hires and stuff I had to fix. But the condition I wanted to show you here is that because we added the lump sum date, oh boy, we added a whole bunch of missing people. These are going to be your non-lump sum people. So if you're one of the school districts that adds an extra date for lump sum, you're going to run into this, okay? If all of these people are non-lump sum people, we will accept one comment for them, and it will be that all of the people who show up as missing on June 28th are our non-lump sum employees, but our lump sum employee, our lump sum payroll happens on a non-payroll date, okay? And because of that, we will allow these and we will accept your file. There's nothing to do to fix this. We don't want you to lie on the payroll system, okay? You need the 6/28 date in there to report the lump sum people, and that's going to create this condition. So that is the last of the things I want to show you. Again, I apologize for going over this. This definitely took longer than when we demoed it. Having said that, I don't know if we have any other questions out there. And if anybody has questions, I will stay on as long as you want, but I don't want to hold people up.
No other questions at this time, Bobby.
All right, awesome. All right, well, thank you all for joining me. I apologize for running over. You're probably not too surprised if you know me. And hopefully we try to bake in a lot of like real pertinent examples for you. Situations where people need to be terminated. The idea of using the two browsers. I really hope you found this to be a helpful demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and just pop back into our slideshow here. And again, just to review, don't forget 10th of the month, make sure you're validating, validate before going in your reports, you're running your errors and exceptions, apply to commit your changes, all that sort of stuff. Please know that you're a key partner to everything we do. We want this to be a we situation, not a you and an us. And then last but not least, if you have any questions, please reach out to your assigned employer services rep. If you're not sure who, use the EMP SUP at trb.state.ma.us as shown in the middle of this slide. You also have it in your handout. The employer support box, we'll make sure we get you moved over to your rep. If for some reason your rep's on vacation or something, we'll make sure somebody gives you an answer sooner. And that's all we got for today. So I will stick on for another minute or two just in case some questions come in because we do have a little bit of a delay. Other than that, thank you so much. I apologize for running over, but hopefully this was worthwhile and folks found it valuable, and this makes doing your reports a little easier. So with that, thanks again for joining us. This very well might be my last presentation, so I just want you to know it's been a pleasure over the last couple decades doing this. Again, thanks for coming. And we'll hold for any questions for like another minute or so. I presume we got nothing else coming in?
No new questions.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, I wish everyone a great afternoon. Get those reports submitted and let us know if you need help. See you later, everybody.